Draft Mechanic is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Pull up a chair at punchboardmedia.com. Draft Mechanic, Episode 83.
On this episode of Draft Mechanic, we've got a Kickstarter preview of Bad Maps. We discuss recent plays of Carcassonne the dice game, Scarabya, and Team Up, which we're putting on tap. We've got a 6-pack review of Space Base. We talk about tea and beer, and in our final round, we asked our Slack channel what games have completely taken over their lives. So sit back, relax, grab a pint, and enjoy the show.
You've seen the future, and it works to take the mile. All is for the best in the best of our world.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Draft Mechanic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Danielle.
And Draft Mechanic is the podcast about board games and craft beer and anything we can do to tie the two together.
Here at Draft Mechanic, we like our beer like we like our board games.
Maybe by putting a new twist on the familiar.
Very much so. We are going to be doing a 6-pack review of Space Base, which we will talk about being sort of familiar in some of its mechanics. And in our beer segment, we're talking about putting tea, which is familiar to most people, into beer, which is a new twist on that. That is sort of an up-and-coming trend. So I think that fits really well.
Yeah, and we've got a few other things here that will come up as we talk about it. Definitely some twists on the familiar.
Like the CarcaZone?
Oh, geez, about the Carcassonne. Anyway, if this is your first time listening to Draft Mechanic, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate new listeners and also all of our current listeners. If you are on the internet, which you are, I guess, if you're listening to this, you can always give us some feedback on the internet at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Draft Mechanic.
We've also got a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. There will be a thread up for this episode and every episode. So if you have opinions on what we're talking about, or you just want to chime in with your thoughts on the games or beers or whatever, you can go over to that guild and we will be very happy to hear what you have to say.
We also have a Board Game Geek micro badge. So if you are a BGG user, you can head over to our guild and jump in the thread there if you want to get the micro badge, or if you just need some geek gold to make it happen. We had 2 new people pick it up since last time, Joshua Van Horn and Javier Perez. Thank you to both of you, new micro badgers. By the way, badgers are small mammals in the family Mustelidae, which also includes the otters, polecats, weasels, and wolverines. Very important information.
There's already one board gaming podcast which has a rodent-themed mascot. We do not need to have a badger-themed mascot.
Okay, fine. But I do really appreciate our micro badgers, people who pick up that BGG micro badge.
True fact. And if you do happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, one last little bit of show business, we do a twice-monthly meetup. The next one is going to be on the first Thursday of September. We do the first Thursday and the third Tuesday of every month. And the next one is going to be at Good Road Cider Works on September 6th. So we would love for you to come out, grab some cider or some apple juice or some mead or whatever you'd like. They have some beer too. You can grab a drink, have a great time playing games. We really love that spot, so we be very happy to see you there.
Yeah, it's just a few days away, and it's such a great place to play some games. Plenty of tables, plenty of parking, plenty of lighting. Just really big fans of
lots
Good
of
Road.
everything.
All of those things. I want to move on to talking about games, and here's the other thing that I wanted to talk about that is a new twist on the familiar.
Oh?
Stonemaier Games released their final game of 2018, and it is called Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, claiming the what the heck title of the year, really, kind of thing.
I mean, it explains very much what the heck it is.
Yeah, it really does. And so this is coming. Actually, the real kind of big surprise about this is that he waited to announce this until it was ready to pre-order, and apparently for Stonemaier Champions, this game will be shipping in the next few days. So it's already here in the warehouses ready to go, which is a really kind of a big change for Jamie Stegmaier and Stonemaier Games in general, getting away from Kickstarter and kind of giving notice on Charterstone and then Scythe, Rise of Fenris and My Little Scythe, all those things that had, a good bit of a build-up. And this one is he wanted to try out and just see what happens if I release a game without a whole lot of fanfare. What happens? Well, I mean, it does kind of like make a whole lot of chatter across the internet. I mean, we're talking about it right here. But I'm actually really interested in this one. I enjoyed Between Two Cities, which is one of the 2 foundational games, and I enjoyed Castles of Mad King Ludwig from Bezier Games, another, one of the kind of formative pieces of this, but neither of them was really something I was super hyped about. I didn't really love either of them. So this new Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, designed by Ben Rossett and Matthew O'Malley, the original designers of Between Two Cities, takes that kind of co-op competitive building where you're building a castle, or in this particular one, you're building a castle between two players that are sitting around the table there. And it adds in kind of the scoring adjacency and also the bonus structure that you get out of Castles or Palace of Mad King Ludwig. I'm really excited, and we've been watching the videos on this, I'm really excited to see the way that those two things work together. Because frankly, I would play this game even if it was just in, you're building your own castle right in front of you. It wouldn't be super different or interesting, because that is kind of like Castles is like. But putting it in that between two, where you have two different castles that you're working on, and the one that is the lower score will be your score, is a really interesting twist on this particular kind of mechanic.
The thing I am a little bit hesitant about on this one is that there does seem to be a sort of more robust scoring structure to this than in Between Two Cities. Mm-hmm. It has a more Castles of Mad King Ludwig style scoring structure, where you have a different bonus for getting 3 rooms of every type, and you have different rules for how the different types of rooms want to be scored. And I have a feeling that if you're playing this and you're relying on another player, it's going to be really important that everybody has a really strong grasp on the rules and the scoring. Otherwise, if you're relying on somebody else and they are missing one of the rules, or they think something scores differently than it does, they may end up tanking your score because you get the lower of your 2 scores. So I have a feeling that this is going to be a more interesting game, but a harder thing to get into than Between Two Cities, because you're going to have to be really, really sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on with the scoring.
Yeah, no question about that. And you can see just by looking at the score sheet, which is more really like a score spreadsheet, it has, you're gonna love filling out that thing. It has a lot of columns and a lot of rows, to the point where somebody on there actually, was just kind of asking a question of whether or not that I need to use this whole score sheet for every single player, because this thing looks like it might take a long time to score. And that's going to be kind of a turnoff to some people. But I don't know.
I guess.
Yeah.
We'll have to wait and see how it plays and how it works with our group, certainly.
Yeah, but given how quickly this thing is delivered, we're not going to have to wait a whole long time to see. And that's really interesting, and I'm excited to see how that works out for this particular game release. So, moving on to Kickstarters. As usual, we've got an update on last episode's projects. We've got 2 to talk about. Danielle?
First, we've got Adrift Lost at Sea, which is still funding. It's going till Thursday, September 13th, and it is currently funding at 145% of its goal. It has unlocked a few additional card and component quality upgrades, so this is going to be a nicer game than it might have been.
Yay!
And you still have time to get in on that. What you don't have time to get in on is Bargain Quest 2nd Edition. This funded at 1,306% of its goal. You can sign up at the BargainQuestGames.com website to get notified for late pledges, and there is a 3rd special add-on pack that was content relating to the Penny Arcade Live Play Podcast Acquisitions Incorporated that was included in this.
Yeah, I think that's a really neat add-on. There was that one, and Table Titans and 8-Bit Theater, I think, were the 3 different kind of special packs that they had in this particular one. Bargain Quest was kind of interesting in that they didn't do any stretch goals at all, but they did have these additional packs that were already planned beforehand, and they just kind of revealed them throughout the campaign to kind of stir a little bit of interest. And obviously, they stirred a good bit of interest at funding a huge amount. So nice. Congratulations to Bargain Quest. And if you do want to get in on that one, BargainQuestGame.com is the website where you can sign up to get an email to get on their late pledge mailing list.
Why don't we talk about some new Kickstarters,
new Kickstarters, you say?
I do.
So first up, I've got Infamous coming to us from Eagle-Gryphon Games. It's currently funding at about 111%, $27,000 of its $25,000 goal, and this one ends on Friday, September 14th. It has an estimated delivery of July 2019, and you can back it at $59 for the game. Shipping for this will be charged after the campaign, so I encourage you to check the bottom of the page there to find out what it will be in your region. So Infamous plays 2 to 5 players in 60 to 120 minutes. In Infamous, you want to become an infamous supervillain by completing contracts. You're going to build specific rooms in your supervillain's super secret lair to attract henchmen that will then help you towards those goals. It plays in 3 rounds with some push your luck and also some dice rolling to maximize your mischief. So I was reading through the rulebook kind of earlier today to prepare for this, and there's a few interesting things about the mechanics that I really wanted to talk about. Like I said, you're building rooms inside of your lair to attract henchmen, and the henchmen will then help you accomplish these contracts. But each of them have some interesting twists. Unlike a game like a boss monster or something, where you're playing cards in front of you that will attract whatever hero, this one has a kind of a track of the 4 different types of henchmen that you can attract, and the buildings that you build will move you up on those tracks. And then once we get to the assigning henchmen stage, it will obviously, whoever has the most particular in that track will be whoever attracts that henchman. But instead of it just being a simple thing like that, one thing that I found really interesting is that you have to kind of like pay for that particular henchman in whatever number of points that card requires on that track of that choice. And in each round of the game, you're going to have 2 of each kind of henchman come out. So you're actually going to be spending some of those points, which will then obviously, or probably, put you at a lower level than another player who can then attract the next henchman of that type. And I find this really interesting because if you're looking at the different henchman cards that are out and you're choosing which rooms to place in your particular supervillain layer, you might say, well, I don't want to put the best thing out yet because I don't want to attract this first henchman. They're not as exciting as I want them to be. So I'm going to kind of sandbag myself so that my number's 1 or 2 lower, so once that other player buys that henchman, the next one will come up and it'll be something I'm more excited about. We'll hopefully get a cool draw on the next one here. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing that particular kind of like card acquisition.
At the same time, if you really wanted a couple of the same type of henchmen, you could go full on in one category and just like put out all of your rooms, I would think, and then bump yourself way up on the track. So even after you paid for a low value henchman, you could still be ahead of the other player, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Cool.
It's a really interesting way to kind of manipulate that I haven't seen in a game like this before. The other thing that I really enjoyed about this, each round of the game, you have 6 contract cards out that are going to require different kinds of henchmen and different kinds of skills, so on and so forth. But they're all face down, and on the back of the card, it tells you the number of henchmen that particular contract is going to allow you to assign, what the kind of suggested trait for that particular contract will be, and also how easy, medium, or difficult that particular contract is. So you kind of have only a vague idea of what you're going to need to win that. So when you flip over that card and you see, okay, so it needs a bunch of might power, but it needs 4 successes, you're hopefully have assigned the correct people to that will then allow you to roll well on the dice for you to win those contracts. The thing that's really interesting there is that you might need 3 successes, but depending on what kind of henchmen you bring to the table that roll each on the 4 different traits that I kind of talked about before, the dice aren't all balanced the same. They all have one that is that particular trait simple, which counts as 2 successes if it was the suggested trait for that particular encounter, but they also have a different makeup of what blanks and successes there are available. I think the one that's might has the 1 double, and then it has 4 1 power, and then it has 1 blank, but the one that's magic has the one that's that trait. It has a single, it has a triple, and then it has 3 blanks. And I find that really interesting that the different kind of skills have different kind of balance depending on how the luck is going to pay out on that. I found that just a kind of a neat thematic idea.
Speaking of theme, I absolutely love the way this game does not take itself seriously at all. We actually got to look through a bunch of the different evil scheme, failure, and success conditions because we got to see a little bit of a prototype of this at Mega MooseCon this past weekend, but since the last episode, we got to look through a couple of these cards, and it is just really lighthearted, goofy, sort of sarcastic humor, and I really enjoy that you can have a mechanically good game, but also one that is kind of goofy and doesn't take itself too hard.
Yeah, and it looked like production on this is going to be really strong. It's got good, clean graphic design, so I'm pretty excited to see this. We've got another week and a half-ish on this, and so if that sounds interesting to you, go check out Infamous on Kickstarter.
Our next Kickstarter is from Floodgate Games, and it is Bad Maps. This is actually launching on Wednesday, so it is not out when this drops, but it will be out in 2 days after this drops, and it will be running through September 28th. You can back the game for $30 in the US with shipping included. Woohoo. It says technically 3 to 5 players, but there is a 2-player variant that is in the rules of the preview copy that we actually got to look at, which Jake will talk you through the rules of in a little bit. It plays in about 40 minutes, and this is a game of programming and pirates and plunder. It's designed by Tim Armstrong, and the art is by Kristen Pauline.
In a game of bad maps, you and all of the other players are pirate captains searching for treasure on one fancy island.
Yar.
This island is kind of fancy in that it has a big old giant red X in the middle and a grid of squares on which you will move a bunch of minions around. There's 4 minions involved in the game. You're not controlling one directly. You and all of the other captains are going to be giving instructions to these minions that they will all then go to the island and execute and hopefully find the treasure, or at least end up where you want them to end up. The game takes place over 2 rounds, and each round of the game you're going to get a set of objective cards that will tell you how far away you want each specific minion to be. You'll have 4 cards, and as the round progresses, you'll discard one and then another so that you have 2 you're going to score at the end of the round. And these cards will say, I want the yellow minion to be closest to the X, I want the gray minion to be the furthest away from the X, or I need the blue guy to be between or first and second closest to the X. And you're going to accomplish this by using your navigation cards. Each captain has the same set of 9 navigation cards, the 4 cardinal directions that when you assign them to a minion and that particular one activates will turn that minion towards that direction. And then there's also movement cards that are either 1, 2, or 3 spaces ahead or 1 or 2 spaces backwards, relating to the direction that they're currently facing when that card comes up. Each minion has 5 spaces assigned to them, and you're going to take turns in player order, placing a card onto whatever next available space for one of the minions you wish. Everybody could play all on the blue one at the beginning, or you could take turns kind of jumping around the board, but as long as you are playing the next card on that particular track. This all sounds very easy right now, because you can obviously be looking at the cards and seeing exactly where that minion is going to go. But we are going to complicate it by making these maps very, very bad. Each round of the game will also have a blackout card that will tell you which of those spaces will be played face down, so that only the person playing that particular card will have any idea what that minion is about to do.
Well, not quite any idea.
Very true. The backs of those particular cards will tell you whether or not that card was a cardinal direction card or a movement card, giving you at least a vague idea of if that person's going to be moving or if they're going to be turning on that particular card space.
Perhaps they run into the sea.
That is a very real fear because, as I said earlier, this is an island and these maps are very bad. The minions will follow the instructions exactly, even if it does mean that they walk off the edge of the island into the sea or onto one of the 4 pit spaces. There's just holes in this island. I guess somebody dug a hole there on a previous journey, and I guess maybe minions aren't very smart and they walk into the hole. If they fall into a hole or into the sea, they respawn directly on their initial start spot with the direction that the particular start spot tells them to face, which, if they respawn at the very end of the round, will be bad because any minion that is on their start spot at the end of the round will not be counted in the scoring. So you might have 3 of the minions all run into the sea on the very last turn, they respawn on their spawn spot, and then that one remaining minion, no matter how far they are closest and furthest from that particular X. These maps are not very good.
No, and these minions are not very smart.
On the second round of the game, you'll get a new set of objective cards, and all of the minions that were not on their start space will dig a new hole, so you'll have even more holes to deal with in that round of the game. Everybody restarts the minions to their start spots, and you are going to go again in hopes that somebody figures out where in the world they are going.
How do you win?
Well, you win by having the objective cards that give you a whole bunch of gold. I forgot to mention that. The objective cards are your points as well, and that you score, 2 to 4 points, depending on which cards you have that are successful.
So I want the most gold?
You do, believe it or not, want the most gold and or points in this game. I know it's hard and confusing to believe, but most points is how you win a bad maps.
Yeah.
So like we said, this was a prototype preview copy, so the components and stuff were not final, but the art was. I really enjoyed the art, and I really like the way that this game looks on the table. One of the things that I most appreciated about this game, and it's very common to see this kind of thing happen when you have a bunch of minions that are color-coded and also the players that are color-coded. In this particular game, you have 4 minions and possible 5 players, and none of the colors overlap. Thank you so much, Floodgate Games, for making that simple, easy distinction and not having 2 different color-coded things share the same colors. It's silly to do that.
They've also made it so that if you are colorblind, you can still play this game because each of the player colors is assigned an animal, I guess,
Companion?
compatriot?
Yeah, a friend.
Yeah, their pet. And all of your cards have that icon on the bottom corner of the card, so you're able to see which are yours even if you can't see that you have the orange cards because you have the cat, which is a real combination, which makes this another positive in my book for why this game is cool. All of the colored minions are also different shaped minions, so the red minion is also a small child-looking person facing to the side, whereas the gray minion is taller than all the rest, and the yellow is a normal height woman, and the blue is sort of this dude doing a weird dance. So you are able to match them up even if you can't see the colors, which I think is good.
Yeah, really good smart thoughts to accessibility on all that I really do appreciate. There's 1 or 2 additional gameplay things that are nice. each player starts off with a spyglass token that allows them to look at a face-down card that another player has played, and between rounds, if you were the player with the least points, you get an additional spyglass for the second round, so it's up to you to decide when you want to play that. Also in the base box, there's an advanced variant where you flip over that board, and you're going to be randomly setting up the start locations and the pit locations for that first round, which is pretty nice because once you get used to where everything is, you kind of get an idea what your strategy will be, and this gives you more variability and replayability by flipping over to that backside of the board.
That advanced variant also gives you individual player powers for each of the different colored captains, so that the player powers are going to be a little bit different. Maybe you start being able to look at a card that's played on a specific spot. I'm able to use my spyglass to play a card that would normally be face up, face down. There's all different powers for each of the captains, so that adds a little bit more variability, like we were saying earlier. That's really what that advanced version adds.
Yeah, and after we had played a few games of the base game, jumping over to that advanced version definitely spiced it up and allowed us to kind of use the kind of game structure knowledge that we had learned so far about the way that the knowledge works to give us a little bit more fun and more excitement in playing a game of Bad Maps.
And there is a lot of information that is given to you, even with imperfect information. Because you know what type of card was played, whether it's a facing card or a movement card, and you know what cards the other players all start with, you can look at what's played face up on the board and use that to figure out what is played face down. If I know that Jake has played his east and west facing navigations because they're already up, I know he can't make somebody face in that horizontal direction. If I see that he's already played 2 of his forward movement cards, that means he only has 1 left, so if he's playing another movement card, it's more than likely going to be a backward movement card. You also can, at some point, decide, just based on the amount of movement and facing that minions have done, you can sort of guess when they're just running off into the sea or into a pit or something. And at that point, it doesn't really matter what has happened up until that because they're going to fulfill their next order starting at their start space. So if you get lost at a point or you don't really know what card somebody has played, but you can guess that whatever it is, they have just sort of thrown this minion to the winds and they're not really trying to get them close to the treasure, you can operate based on the fact that at some point they're going to be starting back at that home space and go from there. And a couple of times that was really useful to me in games where I was like, okay, I don't know which of your cards you've played, but I can tell you're not trying to get this person close based on the other cards that you've played. I'm just going to think that after you played this large movement card, they're probably going to end up somewhere they don't want to be.
I think that uncertainty of the last 20% of programming that you don't really know brought a lot of fun and excitement into this game. I had a lot of fun having fun with Bad Maps, and that's really kind of where it placed. You know, this isn't a game that you're going to take to a party or a big gathering, but it's also a game that's lighter and more fun than stodgy Euro Night. It's a great family weight game, and I feel like it'll also do a really great job of being an introduction to programming games for players that haven't really played with any kind of programming movement before.
Oh yeah, this is definitely a great gateway programming game. Especially compared to something like Robo Rally, where you can just spend forever trying to program, especially if you make like a big setup course. This is a really fairly simple game. You're moving around this very confined space, and if you get super lost, eventually you might just hit a reset and end up back at the beginning. It doesn't punish you too hard, and since it goes over 2 rounds, if you do poorly in the first round, you have a chance to start all over again and try to figure out what you did wrong in assessing the information on that second round.
And if you do poorly on both rounds, then you just had a fun time running people into the ocean, and there's something to be said for that.
To the sea. That being said, if you don't like programming games, Bad Maps is not going to change your mind completely about that. You're not going to like this game. It's not going to be for you. If you haven't tried programming games, or they are something that you like and you want to have a really accessible one, this is one you might want to check out. Check out that Kickstarter before the 28th.
Yeah, go check out Bad Maps. And in the meantime, check out this bump music. Want a second opinion on some of the games we talked about on this episode? Check out some other great content creators at punchboardmedia.com. All right, party peoples, it's time for us to all take a dive back into the CarcaZone.
You all right there?
Sorry, hold on. I haven't had a chance to use the knob in a while. I really was just kind of excited about that. Thank you very much for allowing me that one indulgence.
All right, this week we're going to be talking about Carcassonne the dice game, which is technically a CarcaZone.
It is technically a Carcassonne.
I feel like that should be the tagline for Carcassonne the dice game. Technically a Carcassonne.
Technically a Carcassonne.
This came out in 2011 from Rio Grande Games, and it plays 2 to 5 players in about 10 minutes. The designers are Oliver Lamontagne and Klaus-Jürgen Werder. This is a game of dice rolling and, I guess, tile placement?
You're going to skip over the artist line? Come on, I put all the work into putting down the artists for this game.
It just says no.
There is no art in Carcassonne.
I mean, it's got box or tin art.
Tin art, yeah. It's a jester jumping. He's doing a really dramatic split. So,
yeah, it's weird.
Okay, for those of you who are just coming to episode of Draft Mechanic and did not listen to all the episodes before Gen Con and the Gen Con hype list, we've been doing a Carcassonne game every episode. I think we got through 6 or 7 different Carcassonne spin-offs. We're not talking base, we're not talking the expansions, we're talking about all the standalones and all the spin-offs. So at Gen Con this year, as I was wandering around aimlessly, I ran into one of the booths of kind of just like the giant Rio Grande-ish clearance zone. I don't really understand. Like, it's not Rio Grande themselves at a booth. It's like somebody who just has pallets upon pallets of Rio Grande and that kind of Euro stuff. And there was a sign that said you can get Carcassonne the dice game for $5.
You missed the $75 copy of the Catapult that they had out.
Darn, I missed the Catapult. Oh, darn. That's for you, Patrick. I know you're listening. Anyway.
But you got Catapults.
I did get... Oh, jeez. All right, so Carcassonne the dice game is technically a Carcassonne game. It comes with 9 dice. On the dice, you have 4 faces that are Carcassonne cities. You have it has 3 sides of city. You have the kind of, it's connecting 2 halves of a city. There's the one where there's the double cap side, and then there's one where there's like 2 caps, but they don't really kind of meet up on a corner. If you've played Carcassonne, you know,
pieces.
Yeah, Carcassonne pieces. The other 2 ones, there's one side that's a meeple, and there's one side that's a catapult. I didn't want to play the catapult. But anyway, here we are. So on your turn, you're going to roll all of these dice. Any catapults you roll are going to be immediately passed to the next player, and then you're going to look at these dice, and you're going to decide whether or not you can form a Carcassonne city out of them by matching up city piece to city pieces.
But what if I can only build part of a city?
Well, you have rerolls. You get to reroll any dice you want twice more. Again, any catapults you go, fling themselves off to the next player. But you also have those, the meeple shape, which are just the knights, is what they call them in this particular Carcassonne dice game. But nominally, you're going to try to form a city, and if you have formed a completed city in your 3 rerolls, you score points. Kind of a pyramidal scoring points for the number of dice you use from 3 all the way up to 9, I guess, if you can somehow roll all 9 that work into a thing together. Good for you. You did the thing. But if you do complete a city, you get to score whatever number of points, and you write it down on the included tiny score pad that is literally like a 2-inch square of paper. It might not even, it's like 1.5 inches square of paper.
Yeah, it's certainly not a score pad. There's no score indication on it. It's just a scratch pad.
A pad of white pages and 1 golf pencil. So, if you want to, and you roll 3 of the knights, you can choose to pass scoring at all on that particular round of the game and save one of those dice to remind you that you collected 3 knights. Congratulations. Once it gets back around to you, you will roll that along with whatever dice you have to then double whatever the score is for that particular round. So the one interesting thing about this as you play 3 or 4 players is that if people are holding knights and you're passing catapults, the number of dice that you have to work with does dramatically decrease. And I think that that's like the one strength or interesting decision of the game is that you're going to have to be kind of deciding, am I going to push my luck knowing that 2 of the dice are out in other players' particular hands right now? And then once somebody scores 42 points, that person wins.
Of course, 42
points. Oh, and if for some reason you roll all 9 catapults on the first roll, you automatically win the game, no matter who scored what points. That is an actual rule in Carcassonne the dice game. Danielle, how did you like Carcassonne the dice game?
Don't spend the $5 buying Carcassonne the dice game. It's not Carcassonne. It's a dice game. It is that.
You do roll dice.
But it's not anything special by a long shot. And it doesn't even feel like a Carcassonne. So I don't understand what the draw would be. You are playing an entirely luck-based game, which there are better entirely luck-based games, and there are better Carcassonnes. So this, I don't see where this is.
Why does this exist? I'm pretty sure that this exists solely because they wanted to release something for the Carcassonne 10th anniversary in 2011. In fact, from what I saw, that was it was released for the 2011 Carcassonne anniversary. Hooray! But like I said during the game description, you have the decision whether or not you're going to try to double your next score. You had that on one of your games. You went to double pretty early on, and you ended up not having a score that particular turn, so it was a waste of 2 complete turns, and then you ended up winning the game anyway because you got 30 points in 1 turn. And, man, oh geez, don't do this thing. Don't get Carcassonne the dice game, unless you really want to have every Carcassonne. And even then, I regret what I've done here. It was $5, but we get to talk about it for a few minutes on a podcast, so I guess that was money well spent.
Yeah.
Well, that was money I spent.
It's certainly a thing. It's not a thing I'd say you should buy.
Carcassonne the dice game exists. That's my glowing review of it. But I think it is time for us to move on. I'm sorry that we did not have a full-on CarcaZone, but we're working our way back into it. CarcaZone. There's a lot of other effects on this thing I could be using if you want.
Please turn the knobs back to normal.
Tons of effects. All right, fine.
Okay, get out of the CarcaZone.
I'm out. Okay, let's move on and talk about Scarabya. This is a 2018 release from Blue Orange Games that plays 1 to 4 players in 15 to 20 minutes. This is designed by Bruno Catala and Ludovic Maublanc, with art by Sylvain Alblin. It's a game of area enclosure, tile placement, simultaneous play, and who in the heck made up this board setup? Daniel Brooks did.
In Scarabya, you are going to start with a square frame that you're going to place in front of yourself, and everybody is going to get a square frame and a set of boards which are identical. Not to each other, but to the other player's sets of boards. Mm-hmm. One player is going to randomly place the 4 boards within the frame so that you have a landscape that everybody is working with that's the same. And then there are some holes in the boards, and you're going to place these little plastic rock tokens that you have into the holes in the board, and they're going to be obstacles for the placement of your tiles. Everybody has a set of tiles, which again, all the sets of tiles are the same. They just have a different theme on them, and they're colored differently. And they coincide with a stack of cards that is placed in the center. There is 1 card for each tile in the set of tiles that you have. Once you've placed all of your boards and your rocks inside the frame so that they are all identical setups, one player is going to flip the top card, and everybody's going to take that tile piece that they have, and they're going to place it onto their board with one of the squares of the piece that they're placing overlapping one of the 4 center squares of the setup. So you're starting in the middle of the board as opposed to on an edge. Your board tiles have a couple of features on them. They have those holes that I had mentioned that you put the rocks into, but they've also got scarabs, and the object of Scarabya is to wall off the scarabs in sections that are between 1 and 4 tiles on the board. When you do so, you are going to place a token on each of the scarabs, which coincides with the number of squares in the section. So if I have a 4-tile section that has 2 scarabs in it, I'm going to take 2 4-tile tokens and put 1 on each of those scarabs. Once everybody has placed their pieces and marked any scarabs that they've walled off, you're going to flip the next card and you're going to place the next piece. You're going to keep going until you get all the way through your tiles. Any tiles that you can place, you have to place, even if they are not really fortuitous placements for you. But if you can't place a piece, you just set it aside and you can move on to the next card when the next card is flipped. At the end of the game, you're going to add up all the point tokens that you have on all the scarabs that you've managed to wall off in 1 to 4 tile zones, and whoever has the most points wins.
That's it?
That's it. And this was a review copy that we got from Blue Orange Games. I do want to state that right before we start talking about it.
So about halfway through my first game of Scarabya, which is about 5.5 minutes in, because it is a very quick playing game, I was struck with this sense of deja vu. We were playing this at Mega MooseCon when we were talking to, friends, and Bert had come up and talked to us, hey, what's this game all about? And we talked really quick about, you play stuff like this, do the such and such. And it was about then that I said, hang on a second. And it wasn't until near the end of the second game, Bert had walked away, and I got my phone out, and I texted him, this is just the roof of Cleopatra and the Society of Architects. But with different scoring. It's definitely different than that. But if you ever played Cleopatra and the Society of Architects, Scarabya plays very much like building the roof of that. You have a set of tiles that are going to come out in a predetermined order, and you are laying them out to create specific areas. And I find this really interesting, being these are the same designers as Cleopatra, basically taking that idea and then redoing it in a way that they're making it just about the placement of the tiles and using that predetermined order of tiles to give players the variety to section it out the way that they want. And that's where the fun in this really comes from, is that you all have the exact same tiles that you're going to be working with, and they're coming out in the same order, but you're going to, from the very first tile of the game, go in wildly different directions from that.
And you had mentioned when you were talking about that how halfway through your first game was 5 minutes in. This is one of those games where you're going to play it and you're immediately going to flip the boards around and you're going to play it again. And maybe even a third time. And you're still only going to have been playing for like half an hour, 45 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of really fulfilling in this game because there is no luck that you have that another player doesn't have. Because the randomness is in the order that the cards flip up, not in what you personally get. It's fun to play this a couple of times and sort of compare what each of the players do with different board setups and with different orders of the tiles, because you get really a more robust data set on who's better at this game if you play it 3 times.
Every time we play this game, I'm also really struck with how quickly it goes from wide open to super constrictive. You only have 12 total tiles that you're going to be placing, and the board is, I think, maybe like 10 by 10 total before you put the rocks and stuff in. But after 2 or 3 or 4 tiles, you've really started to kind of corner yourself into a certain layout, and you're going to have to start making concessions about where you want to place those tiles really quickly, which is way faster than I would have expected, given how wide open it was in the beginning. I think that comes from the fact that the tiles are all 5 squares long, or whatever shape they are, and they're all in such weird, interesting shapes that you're going to have to place them in weird ways to get them to maneuver around those rocks that are pre-existing. And since any tile you place has to be adjacent to an existing tile on at least one full square edge, you're going to make these things a lot less compact than you wanted them to be, while also, obviously, covering over scarabs that you wish you could have found a way to get into one of your little zones.
Yeah, there definitely, early on in each of these games, comes a point where you're like, well, okay, how many scarabs do I have to cover? And how many can I leave in zones that I can break down into 1 to 4 tile zones? Because that also becomes a problem. You don't want to cover over all of your scarabs, but if you don't section these things off when you have a tile that allows you to, you might end up with a 5 or 6 tile area, which means you don't get to score those scarabs at all.
Yeah, I have had many turns where I said, oh, I'm just going to wait for that perfect tile to fit into that space, and then I get 2 tiles in, I'm like, well, I guess there goes that one. I'm going to have to completely place this U-shape thing where I needed a straight line or something like that, because that's the only place it'll fit, and you're required to place anything that comes up if you can.
Definitely. I do have a little bit of a component issue with this game, though, and it is such a simple fix, but it is something that was kind of annoying in our plays. Like I said, you have those 4 boards that are going to be placed within your frame at the beginning, so you have the same board setup as everybody else. As far as I can see, those boards are not numbered or marked in any way, so you're sitting there trying to get everybody at the table to be, okay, we want the one with the hole in the second space from the left. Oh, no, you have that rotated from the way I have. If they had just put, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, or a symbol, or anything indicating which board was which, you could take it and be like, okay, take the board with the star on it in the corner, rotate it 90 degrees and flip it over. That's the board that we've got. And they're not really marked in any way, so getting that set up is always a little bit challenging at the beginning of the game. It's not the end of the world, but it's something that would have been so easy to fix that it's kind of annoying that it's not there.
It is a weird kind of misstep, but we could always mark those after the fact, I guess, but...
Yeah, it would have been fine to have put it in the art. I'm not going to be like, yeah, we could fix it.
And I would feel kind of bad about that, because the art on this is really nice. Each player has a different kind of landscape region. One of them's underwater, one of them's in the desert, one of them is in an ice field, and the other one is in a jungle. And I just really like the way that all of the art on all of those tiles is applicable to those particular regions. You just see different kind of Easter eggs and hints on stuff, depending on where your particular set of tiles is.
Yeah, when we were going through the first time we were playing this game, I was describing what was on the tiles. I was flipping the cards, and I was like, okay, this one has a lot of dynamite. And everybody had dynamite on their cards. But then I flipped the next one up. I was like, okay, this one's got 2 trucks. And the player who has the underwater scene, oh, well, those are submarines for me. I was like, okay, well, it's got 2 submarines then, 2 vehicles. So it is the same artwork, but it is thematically tweaked to fit, and I think that's really cool. The rules for this are super simple. It is not a difficult game to go through. I picked up the rule book and I was like, wow, this is a lot of rules for what I thought was a fairly simple game. It's in a couple of languages, which is why it is so thick a rule book. But there were a couple of points where it was a little unclear what they were trying to say. Like, you put the rocks in the holes in the board, which, if you look at the components, makes sense. But when I was reading through the rules, the way they described that doesn't make sense at all. And finally, we were just like, okay, there are square rocks and there are square holes, and the picture shows the rocks and no holes. That must be what they want you to do. Just the way they described it in the rules was,
it was
not
something like
super clear.
Place the rocks where the pictures of the rocks are, or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the board, and there is at least one spot in the desert where there is actually a picture of a rock. I'm like, okay, I see one. Where are the other 5 going?
Yeah.
But it just means where it is pictured in the next column in the rule book, which is not technically accurate if you have a setup that's anything other than that setup which they're showing. And since you can flip all the tiles and rotate them, it was just phrased poorly. And yes, it's only one rule, but there's only like 5 rules in the whole game. So that's a 20% error in the way you've written it, which isn't great. You can learn the game from the rules, but I'm not like, best rulebook ever.
All in all, I feel like Scarabya was the kind of game that is a really good answer to the final round topic we had on our last episode, where we talked about games that are great for the game night bag for playing with people that are wandering by new to the hobby. Since this game plays so fast, it's like a 15-minute play, and it is such a simple, simple teach. Hey, you're just trying to make sections of 1 to 4 tiles. It is a really quick and easy game to play at a game night like that, and I feel like it's the kind of game that could really get people excited about trying some modern board games. And for that, I'm probably going to be keeping it in the game night bag for a while to come.
Yeah, this is definitely really great for new players. If I were given the option, and I'm not often given this option because Bert has Cleopatra and the Society of Architects, and he's the only one I know that has it. But if I were given the option of playing this game or playing a game that had this mechanic, but other things like Cleopatra, I would probably want some more stuff to it. But if I were teaching someone, oh, this is a tile placement game, or this is a spatial reasoning game, this is even something you could use to teach spatial reasoning in general.
Yeah.
Planning and just there are lots of folks who are just really bad at spatial reasoning and could use this type of activity. That being said, I'm not going to pull it out off the shelf all the time just because I have to play this game a ton. But if I have somebody that is new to the hobby that may want to have that gateway level game, it is a good teach. And I wouldn't say no to playing it if somebody wanted to play it.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for a 2 to 4 player quick and easy tile placement game that is good for a lot of different groups, Scarabya is a really good fit for that, and I think that's where it's going to shine. So our final recent play is actually our on-tap game, so here's a little bump music for you. For more information on the beers we chose to pair with today's game on tap, check out the show notes section at our website, draftmechanic.net. So back on our Gen Con recap episode, you told us about a game that you played where you stacked tiny wooden blocks on a tiny wooden pallet.
I did.
And this was the most adorable thing in the world to me. So you had happened to give your card to the Helvetique booth person, and they passed it on to, was it Toysmith?
Toysmith is their U.S. distributor.
Who sent a copy of this game our way, and we were talking about it and putting it on tap on this episode, and this game is called Team Up. It is a 2018 release from Helvetique, plays 1 to 4 players in 20 to 30 minutes, designed by Sebastian Pachon and Hadi Barkat, with art by Geometry, as in wooden blocks, because that's what it is. The game is really just the stacking of wooden blocks is the primary mechanic, but Danielle, you want to tell us about how the game is played?
You're going to start with a rectangular wooden pallet that you're going to place in the middle of the table, and there is one block that it comes with the game that has no color anywhere on the outside. It is just a plain wooden block. You're going to place that on that pallet. You have a whole bunch of other blocks that come with the game. You have a red, white, and blue block of a whole bunch of different shapes. There are some squares which are standing on end. There are some squares which are laying down. You've got rectangles on end. You've got rectangles laying down. You've got some longer pieces. You've got some little short 1x2 square pieces. They're all going to come in all 3 of the colors, and you're going to have a deck of cards. The deck of cards has some cards which indicate a color, red, white, or blue, and some cards which indicate 1, or in the case of the long blocks, 2 of the shapes that are part of the set of blocks that you have. You are going to shuffle those cards up, you're going to flip over the top card, and you are going to find a block which matches the card that has been flipped, be it a color, in which case you can place any shape of that color, or a shape, in which case you can place any color of that shape, and you're going to place it onto the palette it has to touch a block which is already on the palette at the beginning of the game. That's just going to be that one neutral block, but as you build more and more blocks onto the palette, there'll be more things that you can touch. The color side must be up, and you can't take two blocks that are the exact same shape and have them have the exact same shape sides touching. So you can't put a square touching against another identical square so that they form a big cube. That would be too easy. You have to make weird shapes in this game. You're going to keep flipping cards and placing these blocks going around the group if you are playing with more than one player, because you can play this game by yourself if you'd like. And you are going to be trying to form full layers on the palette. You can't have blocks overhanging. That wouldn't count. You have to have all contained within the palette, and every time you complete a full layer, you're going to get 5 points. Every time you flip over a card that you can't place, either because you've already placed all the blocks which would have met that criteria, which can happen because you have colors that are going to be pulling away from your shape blocks and blocks that are going to be pulling away from your colors, and if you can't place it, you're going to lose a point. At any point, you can decide to stop, and you'll count up however many full layers you have, get the 5 points for that, and subtract 1 point for every face down card. If you keep going, it's entirely possible that you're going to keep getting negative points as you keep flipping those cards over. A perfect palette is if you build 5 complete layers, then you'll get 25 points and you win the game. Well, I mean, I guess you kind of always win the game because there is no lose condition, but you did really, really good if you get 25 points.
I always feel like I've won because I got to play on a tiny palette. And that is a win condition in my life.
It is kind of weird that everything else in this game is just cards and very abstract blocks, but the palette is a little recreation of a rectangular palette. It's kind of weird. It's even got like the little brandings that a palette would have on it into the wood.
Yeah, and the palette really gives it a much-needed charm, because this is a very simple, cooperative, abstract game at its core, but once you add the palette and you talk about the theming of this is palette stacking, and you're aiming to create complete layers, it actually does add a little bit of weird theming to this abstract game that you really wouldn't have expected, but makes it kind of fun, and in that way, as when you're playing this cooperatively, you actually feel like you're doing that thing a little bit. You know, I can envision these being boxes that you are trying to effectively stack on the palette, and they're just coming down on a conveyor belt in a certain order. You know, it's loose theming, obviously.
Yeah.
But the palette was not necessary, and I love the fact that it's in there because it gives me anything at all to make it more than, hey, we're going to stack some blocks.
Yeah, I mean, this very easily could have been a piece of punchboard that had a rectangle of a specific size on it, and it would have worked equally fine. But that palette is a fun, it's just a stupid fun piece, and I like it.
As for the game itself, I mean, you know, we've pretty much told you everything there is to know about Team Up. I do wish that, like, there was more scoring variety to it. I guess just getting a complete stack of 5 is nice, but there comes to be a point where you look at the cards and you're like, well, I can't possibly place any more pieces to complete another layer, so it's actually advantageous for me to stop at this point. But I would like it if, you know, in addition to having 5 points per layer, there was some other way that I could, you know, get a bonus point for using all of the pieces or something like that.
Yeah, and one thing they were suggesting was that if you go through this and you play it and you feel like you could have done better, just take the stack of cards, flip it back over, and go through the same stack again, and that way you can sort of challenge your own high score, which, that is sort of an interesting way that you could add a little bit better scoring to just see if you can do it better, not necessarily be like, oh, you get extra points for using all the blocks or for flipping all the cards or whatever, but just like you increased your score, and that gives you that same kind of bonus feeling.
So if that sounds fun to you, you can get this at the Toysmith website. It is toysmith.com. I think it is also on Amazon, and I'm sure you're going to be able to get that from your friendly local game store as well. But Team Up is our on-tap game, so here are some beers that you might pair after your next palette stacking.
Definitely afterwards. Do not drink and logistics. First, from Otto's Pub and Brewery in State College, Pennsylvania, we have Pallet Jack Pale Ale. This is a pale ale that comes in at 6.1% ABV and is brewed with Belgian yeast and Northern Brewer and Simcoe hops. It is seasonal and currently available on tap and in 12-ounce bottles from Otto's Pub and Brewery.
Up second, from Charlestown Fermentory in Charleston, South Carolina, we have an Imperial IPA called Pallet Rider. This is 8.2% ABV and 81 IBU, so it packs a nice hot punch. It's a double IPA with notes of cantaloupe, melon, peach, and resin with a soft malt backbone. This is available on draft and also to go in crowlers from the brewery.
I do want to mention that all of these are pallet spelled like the thing you put boxes on. None of them are pallet spelled like your palate in your mouth, which there are a lot more beers about. Like, if you're thinking, why isn't Pallet Wrecker on this? It's because that's spelled P-A-L-A-T-E.
Yeah.
And that's not, all of these, if you're not looking at the show notes, are spelled P-A-L-L-E-T.
Third on the list from Door County Brewing Company in Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin, we have Pallet Jack Cruiser. It's a session IPA at 4.5% ABV. This is an unfiltered session IPA brewed with Azacca and Citra hops for tropical flavor. It's available in 12-ounce cans, my dude.
Our last one is actually 2 beers from the same brewery. This is from Barley Brown's Beer in Baker City, Oregon. And they have sort of a palate-loading theme to their IPAs. Their single IPA is Pallet Jack IPA, which comes in at 7.2% ABV and 72 IBU. That is a Northwest-style IPA with a balanced malt backbone and citrus and tropical flavors, but also some pine notes. This has won multiple GABF medals as well as a whole ton of other medals. If you go through their awards section on their webpage, it is a well-awarded beer. It is available on draft, and there is an imperial version, which is called their Forklift Double IPA, which comes in at 9% ABV and 90 IBU. And it is an imperial version of the Pallet Jack, like I said, but it is brewed with Simcoe, Columbus, Citra, Chinook, Amarillo, and Atanum hops. And this is obviously a little bit stronger of a beer, and it sounds real tasty. It is also available on draft.
Both those sound real good, and probably a good stop if you are up in that part of Oregon. All right, well, if you would like any more information on any of those beers, we will link them in the show notes. You can go to draftmechanic.net, click the show notes section up at the top, or just click the one on the page for this episode, and that is where the information will be. All right, well, it's time for us to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with our big six-pack review, Space Base. As a Viking leader, I know that when a new land holds untold promise, you have no choice but to set out and conquer. I mean, explore it.
Gunnar, what are you up to?
Well, my axe and I are off to this Mars place you all keep talking about. I have my plans laid, so my clan will be the first to claim it for our own.
In Pocket Mars, new from Greyfox Games, you're trying to move your colonists to your shuttle and then to the surface of Mars. Play cards to gain their immediate effect, or play them to your preparation module to get their effect, as well as the effect of the matching building on Mars. But be careful, other players can play your prepped cards to steal some of your benefits.
Once someone has all of their colonists on the planet, be the player whose colonists are most strategically and powerfully positioned to control the Red Planet.
So this is really it? You're off to be the first Viking leader on Mars?
Well, I'm sure not letting Bjorn the Fuzzy get that glory!
Well, before you leave, check out Pocket Mars at greyfoxgames.com. Greyfox Games. Quality games, cleverly crafted.
I hope there's meat on Mars!
So for our six-pack review this week, we are talking about Space Base, which is a 2018 release from AEG. It plays 2 to 5 players in 15 minutes per player, so 32 more
75.
minutes. 75 minutes. The designer is John D. Clare. The artist is Chris Walton, and this is a game of dice rolling and allocation, card buying and tableau building, and space dollars also. Just a disclosure, this was a review copy from AEG.
So, Space Base is a tableau and engine building game with the goal of amassing 40 space points.
Space points. I love space points.
I'm just going to put the word space at the beginning of everything. You have a space board in front of you that has 12 different sectors on it that will, unsurprisingly, be numbered 1 through 12. You're going to start with a set of 12 cards. One will be assigned to each sector 1 through 12, and all of the cards are going to kind of have the same information on it. They have a blue box that is a power that you will activate on your turn. They have a red box on it that will activate on other players' turns once those cards have been released from your space base board dock thingy. And then up at the top, there's also the sector number that it's required to be in, and as you buy more cards, they'll up in the top left show a cost, which you will pay for with the aforementioned space dollars. In the center of the table, there will be 3 groups of cards that you can purchase and slot into the different sectors on your board. They're split up into tiers 1, 2, and 3 that are progressively more expensive and more powerful. There's also a set of colony cards, which I'll come back to later, but simply put, they're another kind of card that you can buy. On your turn, you're going to roll the 2 included dice, and then you're going to decide how to allocate those dice. You can either take them as the sum of the dice and activate whatever card sector you have. For example, if I had a 2 and a 5, I could activate the card I have in Sector 7, or I could choose to activate them as Sectors 2 and Sector 5. So I either get the combined total or the individual total of each of the dice. You will then earn whatever rewards there are in that particular sector. You'll either get space dollars, or space income, or space points, or whatever kind of space benefits you get off of those. Some of the more advanced cards have more complicated stuff that we'll kind of get to in the gameplay later on. After the space rewards that you get from your space dice, you can space buy a space ship. I feel like I'm overdoing the space thing, yeah?
I think you are a little bit.
Okay, so after you get the rewards, you can choose to purchase some of those cards from that central area we talked about. You have the option to purchase a maximum of 1 card per turn, granted that your money is high enough to earn that particular card. Like I said, they're kind of tiered out into 3 tiers. The bottom tier goes up to like 6 value, and then they're like 7 to 10, and then over the final tier is like 12 and up in terms of cost. So whatever you buy, you can buy, and it will slide in and push whatever ship is in that sector out. You're going to take that old card out, flip it over, and tuck it under the board so only that red section is showing. We'll talk about that in a second when we get to the other players' turns. So you're going to continually be building your tableau and making some of your numbers more and more powerful so that they're more powerful when you roll them on your turn, but also you're going to have more of those red cards tucked underneath, so they're worth more rewards on other players' turns. No matter what you buy, at the end of your turn, your money will reset down to 0, and then if you've earned any income and your income track is higher than 0, you're actually going to reset your money up to that level. This is good because as you go on and you get higher income, your floor is higher, which means earning money to get to higher numbers later is a lot quicker and easier. And if you don't want to buy anything, that's totally fine. You'll actually keep whatever space dollars you're currently at. Regardless, you'll pass the dice to the next player and they'll roll and take their turn, but you're going to also get the opportunity to take either the sum of the dice or the individual numbers on those dice and earn whatever red card rewards you have flipped over tucked onto the top of your board. So as the game goes on and you buy better cards for your tableau that activates on your turn, you'll also be getting more and more cards on the side of your tableau that activates on other players' turns, making it faster and faster for you to get more money or more income or more points or other special powers. There are a bunch of special powers that will allow you to manipulate the dice in fun ways, either adding additional 1 or 2 to the die rolls or activating neighboring sections to whatever you ended up rolling. Also some options to buy additional cards or get additional money by using these charge cubes that you will charge up powers and then choose when to remove that cube to activate that power. So kind of a little bit of mitigation and also planning there. You remember earlier I talked about the colony ships as well, which is another set of cards you want to look at towards the latter half of the game, and these cards are just raw points. They're a big cost, and they do slide into one of the 12 sectors on your board. The catch is, once you slide them into that sector, you can no longer use that number from a die roll, and also you will not be able to put another card in there. You'll still earn points or money or rewards from other players' rolls for whatever red cards are tucked into the top of the board, but if you roll, if you have the whatever point ship in your 3 sector and you roll a 3, you're not going to be able to get anything from that 3 on your turn, so you'll have to end up using whatever the sum is or mitigate the dice in some other way. The game will continue until, like I said, somebody gets to 40 space points, and then you'll play to the end of the round, and whoever has the highest score at that point will be the winner of the space base. So, as we usually do in a 6-pack review, you want to start out with components and art?
Sure. I mean, the cards are a large part of this game. They are fine. They shuffle well. They are fairly easy to pick up. They fit very well in the spaces they're supposed to fit in. They're great, weird-shaped cards.
Yeah, you're going to do a lot of card manipulation in this, and they're kind of like if you took the kind of miniature card, Euro card size card, like Ticket to Ride train cards in the original set, but then you made them like twice as tall. I think that's a kind of a good shape and size for it.
If you took a stick of gum and you multiplied it by 2 in all dimensions, I feel like that's about what they are.
Sounds good. They're just these oblong cards, which is good because they convey the information well. And if they had been full-size cards, your tableau would be unwieldy wide. But it is a lot of card manipulation, and realistically, it is, a little bit frustrating to kind of try to tuck cards up underneath other cards, but you get a feel for it after 5 or 6 games, which we definitely did. I really appreciated one thing about the art design. All of the cards have a ship kind of artwork on them in a space field. And depending on what sector that card specifically inhabits, it has a specific section of the background. So as you're swapping out these cards, the overall panorama of those cards in your tableau stays the same, with just different ships floating in and out. And I think that's a really nice little touch that they could have done in such a, they could have just had everything has the same generic background. Something like that would have been totally fine.
It also allows you to know if something is out of place. Like if you buy a card and you placed it in the wrong sector. I know for the first game or two of this that we were playing 4-player games, and the table we were at, I was sitting upside down to most of the cards. And I kept switching the money cost and the sector cost. But if I put the card into the wrong sector, I would immediately know, because the art would be very out of place when everything else fit in with everything very well. So it was sort of a visual cue that I had done something wrong.
One thing I found a little frustrating about this was the typeface that they used for just numbers in general. It's very quote-unquote spacey, so a lot of hard angles and squared off numbers, which when you're looking at a table that has a tableau of, 30 or some odd cards in front of you, it can be a little hard to read some of the cards if you're trying to scan through really quickly,
2s, 5s, and 6s
they're very
a lot of
similar.
the time look very similar.
I really would have liked to see more distinction in the presentation in that particular side of things, but once you get a feel for it, again, just like everything else, you're going to know what to look for so you don't stumble up too much on that.
As far as the player tableau mats go, they are actually like little boards. They're made like a game board is, which is nice. They could very easily have been much thinner and probably not worn as well and torn when you were trying to stick stuff underneath them, but they are nice, well done boards. Like you said, the art is full color and it's a full panorama. The cubes are plastic cubes. They look like every other set of plastic cubes.
Your standard Wellbob cube.
If you bump your board, you will move the cubes. I know that's a big problem for a lot of people, but
thankfully this game only has 3 cubes to worry about. Otherwise, it would be quite the hubbub.
Well, I mean, you have those charge cubes as well.
That's true. There's so many cubes.
It's not a problem.
It's not a real problem.
I'm just being ridiculous. But yeah, the components for this game are good. I saw no problems with them.
The rulebook was odd in that it had a few kind of decent typos starting out, and then continued on for another 18 pages. This is a game that's not really that complex once you get a feel for it, and I really felt like the rulebook was over helpful, I think is the right word.
The rulebook was definitely bloated, and I think that's because it was written to be a good reference rulebook, which it is. If you look up the section on what you do on somebody else's turn, it has every possible rule you could possibly need relating to what you do on somebody else's turn. The problem is that if you are reading the rulebook to learn the game, you've already gotten most of those rules in the section of what you do on your turn, and in the section on card allocations, and in the section on dice allocations, and you've already gotten that information a bunch of times if you're trying to learn the game. But if you're just trying to look up a rule, it's useful to have those things all in the one section that you're looking up, because you might not necessarily go to the section on what to do on your turn if you're looking about what to do on other people's turns. So I think it's a trade-off, and it's a matter of whether you want a rulebook that is clean and easy to read the first time you go through it, or you want a rulebook that is easy to reference if you're looking something up. And that's just a personal preference issue, I think.
Yeah, I definitely would have loved to have seen the rules for this on a back and front card, or maybe like a 4-page fold, because that's really all it needs. It goes really, really deep into depth on all of the different card powers, and they're very widely spaced on the pages. So, the section on card powers might be 6 pages long when it could have pretty much fit on 1 page of the rulebook. But that aside, like you said, it's easy enough to go back and find stuff in the rulebook. I would just say watch an instructional video and you'll get everything you really need to know on this one.
Oh yeah, this is definitely an easy game, especially if you see it. Listening to a rules description is not necessarily the best way to learn this game, because so much of it is just like, oh, you look at the thing and it makes sense. The cards have your action for when you roll it in blue, right side up on the card. The action for when another person rolls that number is in red, and it's upside down. So if you look at it, you're like, oh, that doesn't look right. But when you flip the card over and you tuck it under their board, it's right side up. And obviously that makes sense when you see it.
One thing I do really appreciate about the game's design is that the setup of the game teaches you the main mechanic of how you take a card in and manipulate it. Everybody gets dealt out one of the level 1 cards, and then for the, before the first turn of the game, everybody slides that card into whatever sector it goes into, and whatever card gets bumped goes tucked under your board, and basically shows you how all of your cards are going to interact in this game. I really appreciated that being a part of the setup, and I found it really helpful to have that step when I'm teaching people how the game works, because I tell them to deal out your cards 1 through 12 in the sectors that match, and then here, take this card, and we're going to learn how the game works. It was a really nice way to actively teach, and I just really liked having that design decision to be part of the setup of the game. So, moving on to theme. Danielle, what do you feel about the theming of this game?
Okay, so having gone back and read through the rulebook, the idea is that you are a captain, and each of your sectors counts as a place that your squadron or empire or whatever controls, and then when you place a new card into that sector, that is the ship deploying out into space, and then you are now building a new ship in that zone to patrol that zone. And when you buy a colony card, it blocks off that thing from being activated any further because there's a new colony there and you no longer control that space, but you still have your cards that are deployed, your ships, that are deployed.
Does it really say those things?
It says all of those things, and there are 3 different kinds of ships that give you different kinds of rewards, and you would never know that from playing the game, and it doesn't matter, and they all have different names, which are listed at the back of the rulebook, but I don't know why they have those names or why they're listed. The theme is space. I tried to put this thing on tap, but the theme is just space, and I can't put just all of space on tap.
Well, I initially read the rulebook and taught from it, and I did not realize that all that stuff was in there, mainly because I skipped over the first 2 pages looking for how to start setting up the game.
Yeah, okay, it's all in there.
Good for them for adding that theme in, and if you want to, make little starship zoom noises as you do that, you absolutely can. But I feel like this game is about the gameplay, and that theming is just window dressing to get me into the actual playing of the game. I am a guy that likes space and space games, so that kind of made me want to play Space Base. I'm not going to lie. Having spaceships on it that look cool and are in space was one of the things that originally drew me to this game. So I'm like, oh, what's this space game about? I'll take a look at that. It's got cards. I love cards. And dice. I'm in.
Yeah, less so me, but honestly, the fact that it was space themed didn't really matter one way or the other once you got to playing this game. It was really just all about numbers and points and money, and I could really ignore the theme if it bothered me, but it didn't really bother me. It's so inoffensive and generic that it was fine.
It's generic space, and that's fine. So, moving on to the gameplay. If you listen to that description and it sounded familiar to another kind of game you've heard before, this game has a lot of similarities to Machikoro in that you are rolling 2 dice on your turn that are activating cards in front of you. But the thing that I really appreciate about Space Base is that you start out with something in all 12 of the numbers, instead of starting out with just a 1 or a 2, and then hoping you roll really low on your first turn so you can do literally anything.
Yeah, I feel like the comparison to Machikoro is inevitable. This has a lot of similar mechanics, and you are going to be looking to play this game in a lot of similar ways. That being said, I feel like this takes the Machikoro sort of formula and improves on it in a couple of different ways. For one, there is a lot more variety in what you can bring into your space base, and because of that, you can really tailor your strategy to what you want to do. But there is enough sort of randomness and luck in the board that can come out. There's I think there's like 130 cards in total that can come out into that shipyard area, which is, by the way, what those buying docks are called.
Oh, I thought it was just cards on the table.
And you have enough variety that you're not going to play the same game every time. There's not a tuna boat strategy to Space Base the way there is to Machikoro. If you played any of the Machikoro expansions, the tuna boat strategy was like, it was a really quick, it was a very strong strategy. And you're not going to get the same combinations of cards or a lot of the same card that you can just milk, because you're putting all of these cards into the specific sectors that are listed on them. So even if you got a card that is very useful, you're not going to be able to put it in whatever sector you want and just spam getting the same really good reward from one roll. You are actually able to stack up multiple cards in your deployed sector, though. So if somebody else rolls a specific combination of dice or a single die that you have a bunch of deployed ships in, you do get a bunch of rewards, but you would have had to have bought each of those cards that matched that sector and then replaced it later. So there is a little bit more work in getting that really good stack of rewards from a single roll.
At the same time, I never really felt super restricted when it went to go buy cards out of the, what you said, shipyard, apparently. Because, like I said, depending on how much money you have either 6, 12, or 18 cards to choose from, which will generally give you options for pretty much any sector in your space base. And I really appreciated having that kind of flexibility. And this is another thing that's a huge advantage over Machikoro. In your base Machikoro rules, you're only pulling out, however many cards at random for what I don't even remember what it is anymore.
10
yeah,
different ones.
but it was so easy to get just like, they're all really expensive cards, or they're all really high number cards, and they're cards that we don't want right now. In Space Base, I always had options to buy something I wanted to buy, and I really, really appreciated that flexibility.
I do want to say that when we had Machikoro, we have gotten rid of our copy of Machikoro, but we had the original rules. I think some of those rules may have been tweaked in the secondary printings, but again, that would be another thing you'd have to buy if you were looking for this experience. I did have times in my games that we were playing where there wasn't a card out for a sector that I really wanted. And when that happened, it really did bring in a little bit more of the strategy, because do I want to buy a card to continue the progress that I'm making, to keep putting new cards up into that top section so that I can get benefits on other players' turns, especially in a higher player game where there are going to be more rolls on other players' turns than there are on your turn? Or do I want to wait, save the money I have so I don't lose all of it buying something, and wait for something to come out in a sector that I really want so that I can replace something that I really want the red benefit of? Maybe there's something that has points on it when you flip it over, and I really want to be able to flip that over so I can get points on your turn and Daniel's turn and, the fourth player's turn if we're playing, a 4-player game, so that I can get all of those points if you guys roll it. Or do I want to just buy something now so that I can just keep getting more benefit and turning stuff over, even if it's not optimal?
I did also find myself surprisingly thinking more about strategy in terms of card buying as I got more comfortable with the different special powers that would come out. Like we talked about earlier on, there's some that have these charge cubes, and a lot of them relate to you put a charge on there and then you pull it off on either your turn or any player's turn to add 1 or add 2 to the sum of the die rolls. And that little bit of mitigation was really helpful for me later in the game as I started to stack up a lot of really good benefits on maybe the 9s and the 10s and the 11s. Unsurprisingly, the 10, 11, and 12 are the sector cards that are going to have the biggest payout in points, or the really, powerful effects, stuff like that, since they roll less when you have a standard 2-die distribution. But having those mitigation things, really knowing that they could come out and, waiting to get those on my low numbers, so when I roll a 1 on my turn that I don't need for anything else, I can put a cube on there and just be ready to pull that off to increase a later die roll. I found that really interesting, that I started to think about those things and not shy away from the high number cards as much. In addition to that, there's some power cards that will activate the neighboring sector either 1 higher or 1 lower than whatever card it is particularly on, and I found myself using those cards again to help build stacks on the neighboring thing. And the thing that was really great about that is that once those activate the neighbor cards go into the red zone section, you get that activate the neighbor thing and also whatever benefits are currently on that number. So if I had the double arrow on my 10, but I also had a 3 coin payout on 10, and my 11 had a 4 coin payout, I'm getting 7 coins on a 10 roll, which is just a fantastic thing, and it's more likely to make me use that +1 or +2 charge to change an 8 or a 9 into that card. It was really surprising the kinds of strategies that I found myself developing as long as those cards would come up. And there's, just like you said, a huge number of cards relatively in the deck of the Space Yard that will come up. So you really have to be looking at the cards that are coming out and saying, okay, well, that's the second out of 3 pieces I need for this particular engine chain to work. I'm going to take a gamble on that one and put it into my docks.
There were also a couple of powers that the more we played, the less useful I found them. There are some powers that allow you to swap some of your sector cards. Say, there is one that's one of the 3rd tier cards, I think it is, that allows you to swap your 12 with your 1, which essentially takes a very powerful card, because those high number cards are very powerful as well as being very expensive, and put it into a spot which could be rolled with a single die. It doesn't necessarily have to be the total, which is great. It's a lot of versatility. But by the time I had enough money to buy those third tier cards that are going to let me make that switch, I had already built up an engine around sort of interactions between my high value cards, and I didn't really want to take that 12. Like, I know in the last game, I had a card that gave me points and also activated the card to the left of it in my 12. And if I had swapped that with my 1, I would have gotten the points, but there is nothing to the left of the 1. So I had no desire to play that card by the time I had gotten to the ability to buy that card. There are also some cards that take multiple charges in order to be able to use, where the charge boxes are linked to other charge boxes on the card, and depending on the number of players, you need to put 3, maybe 4 charges in them to be able to use the effect. Now, the effect is very powerful, but by the time I was able to buy those cards, I was like, I'm never going to get that charged up on my turn enough times.
Yeah.
And if I do, the cost of what I'm missing out on to be able to use that charge, because a lot of them, the card is just, you put a cube on it, and that's all the benefit you get until you have them all full up. Not all of them. There are some that give you dollars in addition or whatever. But the cost benefit of that just never really ended up working. Now, there is a card that if you charge it 5 times, you just automatically win when you pull the cubes off. And that is a 12 card. You need to charge it 5 times on your 12. Now, if you manage to get that and the thing that swaps your 12 with your 1, you have a really good strategy, but that's not something we've ever seen happen, and it would take a lot of luck and a lot of people not paying attention in order for you to get that.
I feel like there might be another layer of strategy on beyond that, because there are also cards that'll let you manipulate your charges. And we never even really use this, but I saw them come up once or twice. There's one where you put a charge on it, and then you remove that charge to move a charge to another cube or to another card, and then add another charge to another card as well. So it really allows you to stack up charges in places you want them faster. And again, it's the same thing, that it's multiple pieces of that particular engine chain, and maybe that would allow you to get that 12 card filled up in 2 or 3 rounds. It's possible, but it's just not something that I ever really felt motivated to go after, and it just kind of felt like more cards that were out there on the board in that particular instance that were cards that I didn't really want.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of strategies that you could go after. I'm just not entirely sure any of them is as quick if you don't fall into all the parts of it at the same time. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure any of them is as quick as just getting a lot of cards that give you a small amount of points and getting a lot of points above your board and just going for it in little increments until you can buy those colony ships for the last big push towards the end. You can do a lot of cool engine stuff, but I'm not sure any of it is that much faster.
So I don't think I said this in the overview, but this game has kind of an interesting tiebreaker. Like I said, once somebody crosses 40 points, you're going to finish out the round, and whoever has the most points is the winner. But if at the end of that final round, 2 people have the same total top points, you're actually going to play a full additional round, and then whoever has the highest score at the end of that round is going to win as well. It's kind of like a sudden death overtime, I guess, in a way. Well, not sudden death. It's just a full another round of overtime. The interesting thing there is that the player who wasn't tied, somebody who was a little bit lower, could then have the opportunity to jump into the lead. I find this an interesting gameplay choice, and I kind of like it, actually. I like playing another round to have a definitive victor rather than it falling to a secondary or even a third level of tiebreaker of, oh, you had the most income, you had the most money left over, something like that, because it really allows a player to have that last ditch effort to grab that final colony ship or get that one great turn off their engine. And I really like having that kind of definite conclusion at the end of an engine building game.
I guess. At the same time, I'm not crazy about it because it means that the people who were in the tie are probably very light on resources, or at least in a worse position on resources than the people who were lower down. So I felt like it came down to kind of a decision of you do the thing that creates a tie and end up in a worse position on resources and maybe hand the win to somebody else, or you don't do the thing that creates a tie and then you have additional resources, but you weren't in the tie to begin with, and then the person who is ahead of you wins. So it comes down to sort of a king-making decision instead of just winning or not winning or having a set second tiebreaker. I would have preferred a set second tiebreaker, but that's just me. I mean, if you're going to play another round and that really works with the way you want to play the game, good for you.
I guess that being said, the only tie we ever had was in one of our 2-player games, which is why we looked it up in the first place. And in that case, it kind of made sense to then do another round because it's just the two of us, and whoever had the better engine would end up winning in that one.
Yeah, but I mean, there was a game we played earlier where Tamara and I were 1 point apart, and it very easily could have been a tie.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, it's an interesting tiebreaker and not one you see very regularly, so I figured it was worth mentioning.
It is definitely different.
But I guess it does also lead into the player count question. This plays 2 to 5 players, and we found it really snappy at 2 and also pretty solid at 3. I've also seen this played at 4 and 5, though, and I would say probably 4 and 5 is a space you don't want to be floating your ships in.
I don't want to play this game at 4. I haven't even considered 5. I didn't even realize it played 5 until we were looking at the box earlier. 4, I felt like there was a lot of downtime early in the game, because even though you start with a ship on each of your sectors on your turn, you only start with one ship above the board tucked so that you get points on other players' turns. In a 4-player game, you're getting 3 times as many other player turns than you are your own turns, and especially if you start with a high-value card, like, you're not going to get anything on most of the other player roll turns, which is a common problem with this type of game, turns where you're not getting anything. And with 4, even with players who are not slow players, it felt like it dragged, especially at the beginning of the game.
But back to the 2 or 3 player games, our 2-player games we were getting done in 25 to 30 minutes, which was super snappy, super fast, and easy to knock out. And even with 3 players, 40 to 45 minutes is where I feel we would be if everybody, we got to the point where we're all getting really good at that game. Even with the teach today, it was 40 or it was 55 or something minutes for 3 of us, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right. But I think when you think about the difference in time that can be, that's the difference between 30 minutes and an hour and a half almost.
Yeah.
I mean, a little shy of an hour and a half. That's a big difference, and I don't want to play this game for an hour and a half.
Yeah, I think 2 to 3 players is the sweet spot for this, especially in my book. I would definitely play it with 2 if you're feeling that engine building itch ever, and I have that, desire to play the engine building games too. And if somebody wanted to, say, hey, let's play this game real quick, I'd be like, yeah, okay, but only us. Let's not, this doesn't even play 4 players today. I have lost the other boards. They've been burned in a fire. I wouldn't actually do that. They're good quality boards.
Yeah, it doesn't mechanically play badly at a higher player count. Like, there's not an issue with playing with 4 or 5 players. It is solely a time issue for me and a sort of momentum issue.
So to tie it up again, I think variability is pretty strong with the amount of cards you have in there. I feel like you've got a lot of different options of engines and engine chains you could try out, so that I feel like I could play this another 6 times without it feeling stale. Do you feel similarly at all?
The more we played this game, the more I had to compare it to the other games it's similar to. It's similar to Machi Koro. It's similar to one of the Valeria games that does the same sort of, you roll dice, you get the rewards that are on the cards in front of you. And while I definitely think Space Base is the best of these games, I'm not sure I need this game.
Okay.
It is a fine implementation of what it is, and I think it does a lot of things to correct problems that we've talked about having with other games in this style. But having played this 6 times in the last couple of weeks, I'm like, if I never played this again, I would not be missing it. Not saying I wouldn't play it again. I would certainly play it again if somebody wanted to, if it were at like a 2 or 3 player count. But while this is a good game, I don't need this game. I do, however, feel if you played something like Machi Koro and you were
bored out of your mind?
Not what I was going to say. I was going to say you were wanting some changes, something to streamline it, something to make it feel more productive. This is a really good option for you.
Yeah.
One thing we did not touch on at all, and I want to throw in real quick at the end, is this is not a mean game, which is something I had a problem with the later expansions to Machi Koro. Especially, I think, the Millionaire's Row expansion made Machi Koro a very mean game, and this is not that. There may be 1 or 2 types of cards that in some way interact with another player. That I have not actually seen any of those cards come out or get bought into somebody's tableau.
Yeah, I saw 1 card come up, and it's a charge-up card, and you take off the cube, and everybody loses 4 points. Everybody, not just a player, but everybody.
Okay, and it's not like you are not going to be able to do anything at that point. It's just losing your end game progress at that point. So this is not going to have that really mean take that some of the Machikoro expansions had. If that's something that you are concerned about, I know it was a benefit for me that it didn't have that.
I guess for my final thoughts, I've enjoyed my time with Space Base. I'll keep it around. It's the kind of game that I can see coming out occasionally because people do like that kind of Machikoro style engine building. And like you said, this is the game that does it the best. I really enjoy the variability. I feel like you've got a lot of different things you can try out in this game. And it's got a cool generic space theme, which is actually a positive in my book. I know it's a 0 to negative in your book, but it's good. It is good. It is a good game. It functions well, and I feel like I could have a good time teaching this to people. So yeah, that is Space Base.
Want to wear your draft mechanic pride to your local brewery, board game meetup, or board game meetup at a brewery? Check out redbubble.com/people/draft mechanic for t-shirts.
So since we put the on-tap game earlier with Team Up, we're going to swing back around to the beer segment. And Danielle, you actually got this one from somebody in the Draft Mechanic Slack channel?
Yes, Megan Naxer asked, this topic might not be large enough for a full feature, but now that coffee is a common addition to beer, what about tea? I've been enjoying more and more beer, and mead, that has tea in it, though a friend of mine who brews mentioned something that makes that a bad idea. What are the risks with adding tea to beer as opposed to coffee? What is the difference between adding herbal tea versus black tea versus green tea? Is this a trend that is starting to take off? Beers I've enjoyed with tea include Shorts Brewing London Fog, Perennial Hopfen Tea, Bee Nectar Kill All Golfers, and Crafted Mead Apocalyptic Farmhouse. I really love this question, and I thought it was plenty enough to make a full beer feature out of, which is obvious by the fact that I did.
Here we are, in the feature.
First, I want to answer her question as to whether tea in beer is a trend that is coming sort of into prominence, and I want to say it definitely is. I've seen a ton of beer that has tea in it being brewed in a lot of the breweries that we keep an eye on for, like, really interesting new styles of beer. I know Burial Beer, that we used to talk about every episode and have talked about a little less, I think, consciously at this point, has a bunch of beer. They have one that is with oolong tea that was really good that I didn't put on this list because I'm not sure when they're going to make it again. But there's a lot of really great beer that has different kinds of tea. And as she mentioned in the question, there's all kinds of different tea that you can brew. And herbal tea is the one that sort of jumped out of my mind, because herbal tea isn't really tea. It's different types of herbs like rooibos or chamomile are not really tea. So a lot of the things that might be effects of tea that she was worried about with the brewing precaution might be different with herbal tea or with black tea. But what I did find is that tea can be added at a lot of different points if you're going to be brewing with it. It can be added late in the boil, it can be added during the dry hopping phase, or it can even be added to the casks while you're aging the beer and getting ready to bottle or can it. There were also suggestions that I saw about adding brewed tea to fermenting beer a few weeks in, so that you're going to make that tea and then add that liquid instead of adding the specific tea leaves in. That is probably going to be like the most surefire way to not have to worry about the effects of putting the actual tea leaves in, because you know exactly what you're adding to your beer. You're adding a liquid to a liquid as opposed to adding an ingredient that's going to flavor a liquid to a liquid. What tea does add to beer when you put it in is it adds astringency and a different kind of bitterness than you might get from hops. It can be an interesting flavor, but if the concentration of tea is too high, that astringency can become really overwhelming. And this is also, I have a feeling, why it is only added in the late part of the boil. Because if you've ever overbrewed tea, like you just, you have some tea, you throw the tea bag in and you leave it there, you walk away, you don't leave it in for your 5 minutes or whatever it's supposed to brew, it becomes very, very astringent. And if you were to put, like, especially something like black tea in a boil for the whole boil, oh god, I can only imagine what your beer would end up turning out like. So for that reason, you're only going to add it in the late edition if you're adding it into the boil at all. Hop choice can be really, really important if you're brewing with tea. Because tea has such a strong and sort of unique flavor, the hops that you use, you're going to want to use a more herbal flavored hop to go with that tea flavor, because you're going to want to meld these things together. And the brewers that I was reading articles from recommended a hop like Crystal or Sriracha Ace, which is a very unique and herbal hop. If you're going to be brewing something with tea, they said don't use something like a really dang hop or something like that, because it's not going to go with the tea. So you want to be really careful when you're choosing the hop that you use, as opposed to, just making a very hoppy beer where you can get a whole different flavor profile by changing the hops. If you're brewing with tea, and you change the hop to something that doesn't go, it could just throw off your whole balance that you're trying to establish. In addition to brewing with just whole tea leaves, you can use things like matcha powder. One of the other cautionary things that I doubt was what Megan's friend was mentioning, but was something that I read in an article and I thought was really funny, was one of the cautionary moments that you need to do if you're adding matcha powder is if you're adding it into the fermenter, be careful because there's gases coming off the fermenter and matcha powder is super fine. So if you try to add a lot of matcha powder into a fermenter with gases actively coming off of it, you're going to get matcha powder everywhere and everything is going to be covered in this really fine green powder. So that is also a risk of brewing with tea, I suppose. While coffee has a lot, she had talked about, why coffee as opposed to tea and what the differences were. Coffee has a lot more in common with beer, especially dark beers in the flavor profile. It's got that roastiness that roasted malt has in it naturally, and a lot of those darker flavors of coffee actually come from the malt itself, so you get a lot of the similar flavor profiles. When you're brewing with tea, like I mentioned earlier, it's more about balancing the different flavors. The bitterness that comes from tea is different than the bitterness that comes from hops, and you want them to work together. You want them to work with your malt profile. So it's more of a balance than it is about accenting what's already there, which you can do very easily with coffee. In addition to the beers that Megan talked about that are brewed with tea that she's really enjoying, which I will certainly second, especially Hopfen Tea and Kill All Golfers. Kill All Golfers is amazing, and it is the thing that I present to people who don't necessarily like beers and meads and ciders, but like tea. I bought a bottle of this for my mom who drinks, if there was a person who was the poster child for oversteeping black tea, it is my mother. She will brew a pot of tea in 11 o'clock at night before she goes to bed and just leave it there until it's empty and then just pour more water in. It is the most oversteeped, bitterest tea you've ever had. I got this Kill All Golfers. I was like, Mom, try this. And she's like, oh, it tastes like tea, but it's not bitter. I was like, oh, it's because they made it right. But it is delicious. But in addition to the things that Megan has mentioned, I wanted to throw in a couple of my favorites that are beers and meads and ciders and all that good stuff brewed with tea. First off, I have Dogfish Head Sahti. This is a Finnish Sahti which is brewed with black tea, and it's also got juniper berries that are picked from Finland. This is not on their release schedule for this year, but this has been one of their rare releases for years and years. I think it first came out in 2009, if I remember what I saw on the internet correctly. It's been a while, yeah. So that is one of their big 750 milliliter bottles. It is really interesting because Sahti isn't a flavor you see done a whole ton, but it is very good, and it's got that nice flavor from the black tea that goes with that herbal flavor from the juniper berries. Again, it's about that balancing. Mars Community Brewing Company has a beer called Jungle Boogie, which is a wheat beer brewed with rooibos tea, which is actually my recording beer for the evening. And they've also got Boogie Nights, which is their imperial version of that. They're both available in cans, and I know they've expanded into our area pretty regularly, so they are getting expanded distribution.
If you are in the Chicago area, they also do a whole bunch of different variants of Jungle Boogie with different fruit additions, which are freaking fantastic, and I highly encourage you to seek those out.
Another beer from Bee Nectar, or not a beer, a cider from Bee Nectar, in addition to Kill All Golfers, which Megan had mentioned, is the Dude's Rug. This is a cider brewed with black tea and chai spices. So it has a lot of the sort of chai flavor that you get, but it is brewed with tea as well. It is actually brewed with tea as opposed to just the spices. A lot of things that you will see that are either beers or ciders or meads are just chai spiced, and a lot of times they don't have the actual tea in it, but this one is brewed with black tea. I am not sure if it is available anymore. I have conflicting reports from the internet, but Stone also does a chai style of their Russian Imperial Stout. I'm not there. It is an odd year release for them. Stone has odd year releases, and so I don't know if they're going to be brewing it next year, but if they do, that is another, that is one of the landmark chai flavored beers, and I would highly recommend it if you can find it. And finally, I have Three Taverns Craft Brewery Lord Grey, which is a lacto-fermented sour with Earl Grey tea. And it is really, really tasty. It has nice sour notes, but you definitely get the tea flavor. It's almost like a tea with lemon, which is like in my head, I was like,
okay.
This is tea with lemon. But it's not. It's obviously much more complex than that, and it is so good. And the can art, as usual for Three Taverns cans, is so pretty. If you can find that, I highly recommend that.
Yeah, that was really lucky fortuitous timing. I was actually just down in Atlanta, and I was at the bottle shop just kind of looking to see what it was new, and I saw that. I was like, oh, well, this is aptly timed. I'm going to grab this thing.
Yeah, they also just did, on the 24th of August, I want to say, they did a specialty release that was even more sort of variant on the Lord Grey, but the Lord Grey is the sort of, I don't want to say base beer because this is not a base beer. It is a specialty beer for them, but it is so good. If you're down in the Atlanta area, I would highly recommend trying it. And if you want to go into our Board Game Geek Guild, and if you have a favorite beer with tea, I would love to know what it is, and I'm sure Megan would as well, because it is a really cool trend, and there have been some really unique and awesome flavors that have come out of this tea trend. I really like it.
I love it. I think Jungle Boogie was one of my favorite beers of last year, and we talked about that at the beginning of the year. It's so good. I'm so excited to be getting it here in the Carolinas. Cool stuff. Great research. Thanks for the question, Megan, as well. Let's move on to other things that we talked about in the Slack, and I have a final round topic, or rather, I finally remembered to put the final round topic up earlier today, and I'm going to kind of explain myself here, because here's the final round topic. I completely botched getting this app's final round topic up. Maybe it's because instead I've played about 200 games of Noch Mal since the app released. So, pals, when's the last time a game completely took over your life? So I will start out here before we get into the responses. We had our Randa Writers episode last episode, and we didn't talk about Noch Mal because A, the app wasn't out yet, and B, we had talked about it in a prior episode. But Noch Mal is available on iOS and apparently Android right now for solo play, and I am absolutely addicted. This is a, dice rolling game, obviously, and you have a grid in front of you where you're going to be filling in blocks of colors based on the numbers and stuff you roll. I'm not going to go into a full description of the game. You can go back in the past and listen to that, but the app is so freaking slick, and it comes with 3 of the expansion score pads built in as well, and I am crushing games of this in about 5 minutes. So I literally, last time I flew back from somewhere, I started playing it while I was waiting to board, and I did not stop playing games of Noch Mal until I landed in Charlotte. And then I played a few while I was waiting for you to come pick me up at the curbside.
I did my best.
You did, but I got a few games of Noch Mal in. I really have probably played 200 or 300 games of Noch Mal in the last week, and I think I'm getting very good at it. I've scored a 35 as my highest score.
I don't know if that's great.
I think the highest score you can get is like a 40 or 44.
Cool.
I don't know. I feel very good. And if you have played Noch Mal as well, congratulations, because then your life is gone. You play Noch Mal all the time now.
Let's get back to the question.
All right. So, Danielle, you want to start us out with the first one here?
Sure. John Tyler said, Charterstone had us playing multiple games per day. We broke it open one Friday night, intending to play 1 game, and ended up playing 5. We decided at 2 a.m. that we had better call it a night. We would have finished it that weekend if we hadn't had other obligations. I am now semi-terrified of starting another Legacy game.
I can definitely see how that happens. I feel like every time we've played Charterstone, it felt like, hey, let's just do another one right now. Because that game does such a good job at maintaining that 1-hour playtime that other cough Legacy Seafall games did not have a chance of getting anywhere near a reasonable playtime where you would play multiple games in a sitting.
I also feel like Legacy has that sort of addictive nature to it, where you want to just play one more game to see what the new thing is. I want to see what's in the box that you open at the end of the next game. Oh, what happens at the end of the next game? Maybe just one more. Legacy games and addictive personalities should not go together.
So good luck to you, John. Hopefully this does not ruin your life with a ton more Legacy games in the near future. Did you pick up Rise of Queensdale, I wonder? Anyway, BJ from Board Game Gumbo says, Gone Sean Clever this week. I taught my wife and we've played non-stop all weekend. Of course, having terrible weather for Labor Day has added to our desire for more games, but the simple play and deep decisions of the game are also driving our back-to-back gameplays. I mean, it's kind of a similar thing to Noch Mal in a way. It's a roll and write, it's addictive, you get that endorphin rush of checking off boxes. That's why they're so excited. I just like the spatial one more, Noch Mal for president or something, I don't know.
Right. Paul Embeden says, Android Netrunner. I was in deep for 2 solid years. It took a massive career change to knock me out of following the meta.
Yeah, LCGs and CCGs and any kind of CG, I could see being a real just time sink and just game that you were going to spend your entire life in. I thankfully have avoided that for the last 15 to 20 years.
Why do we still have Star Trek, first edition in our garage?
Because I haven't remembered to take them to Gen Con to unload on the people playing still to this day. Well, hey, it was a good game. I enjoyed it a lot at the time. It was all I had.
Sure.
All right, finally, Patrick Hillier says Terraforming Mars. I played it all the time when it first came out. Much of that was because of scarcity, and I was the only one with a copy. Then I transitioned into solo play and actually liked it more. I can definitely see this being the kind of game that gets that kind of excitement. I know we played it a whole heck of a lot when that came out. Again, because we were the only ones with a copy, and everybody wanted to play it because Terraforming Mars is great.
It is great.
Good choice. By the way, those of you who enjoy podcasts about board games, you're listening to us right now. Patrick Hillier and Eric Buscemi of Punchboard Media have a new show available on the What Did You Play This Week Productions podcast feed. It is called Patrick and Eric in the Morning. They're going to release, I think, every other week, and it's just a fun little topic discussion podcast. It was about half an hour, so I highly encourage you to go check that out. In addition, What Did You Play This Week podcast recently ended its run a few weeks ago to reformat their flagship show, and I believe today of release of this episode, The Shuffle will be launching, which is their new audio magazine that they're going to release once a month. So you can look for that on the What Did You Play This Week podcast feed today as well. It's wdyptw.com to get all of that cool stuff. So congratulations on the launch of that new podcast and the Patrick and Eric show and all the good fun that is happening over on their feed. Golf clap.
I don't like golf. I'm clapping normal.
That's a real clap. Hey, put that away.
No.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to make this the end of the show then because of your unapproved clap.
That's fine. We were done anyway.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. Again, if you would like to talk with us, you can go to the internet and go to draftmechanic.net or Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at draftmechanic. Draftmechanic@gmail.com is also an option if you choose to use that to contact us.
We have a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. You can let us know what you think about the games we were talking about or tell me your favorite tea beer over there. If you happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, our next meetup is on Thursday, September 6th at Good Road Cider Works.
Finally, always welcome to jump into the Draft Mechanic Slack channel. It's draftmechanic.net/Slack. The Slack must be lowercase because for some reason that's the way Squarespace works. I'm sorry, I can't fix that. But you can just, do that and come talk with us about board games, beer, and all of the usual things you would find in a Slack channel.
And the final round.
Finally, Draft Mechanic is sponsored by Gray Fox Games. Visit grayfoxgames.com and sign up for their newsletter for the latest. Gray Fox Games, quality games, cleverly crafted. It's kind of bittersweet to say goodbye to Gunnar after this first year of the Gray Fox Games sponsorship.
He's gone to Mars. The man has goals.
Mars is very far away. Good job, Gunnar. We're all rooting for you going to Mars. All right. I think I covered it all. Danielle, do you have anything else for this one?
As always, I would like to remind our listeners to please game responsibly and tell them that I'll see them back here in 2 weeks for another round.
I'll take it. Let's go. Good night.
Bye.
Draft Mechanic episode 83 is recorded on Sunday, September 2nd, 2018 in front of a live studio cat.
Beauty is in your eyes, you are the beholder. You render me stricken. Do not go gently into that good light.
Hi, this is Eric Buscemi, popping in to let you know about a continuing interview series I've been doing on the Punchboard Media website called In Focus, Perspectives in Board Gaming. I've been interviewing people that work in all different facets of the board game industry, such as designers Nikki Valens and Danielle Salas, artists Fernanda Suarez and Beth Sobel, board game publishers Anne-Marie DeWitt and Shari Spiro, and many other people with unique industry perspectives. Check out our interviews on the Punchboard Media website, www.punchboardmedia.com, where a new one is posted every Wednesday afternoon.
Punchboard Media, where we all
bring something
to the table.
Pull up a chair
at punchboardmedia.com.